Though the new arrivals filling into the Undercity resembled a funeral procession, they were welcomed joyously, with as much warmth as undead bodies could muster. Many among the incoming group were in varying stages of disorientation and decomposition. Some clung to their burial shrouds like children with their favorite blankets, hoping to wake from the horrible dream they found themselves in. But truth and dreams do not mix well. Even still, the despairing and the aimless were ushered eagerly into their new home beneath the bones of a once great city, where they would be soothed, celebrated, and gently inducted into the sometimes unnerving ways of undead life. For each addition to the city's population was a gift, bringing safety and strength to their fledgling kingdom through greater numbers. On this particular occasion, a couple of veterans, Connor Greystone and Bronwyn Polleran, greeted a cluster of 6 confused foot soldiers, their liquefying vocal cords dripping with kindness. "Let us help you, friends. Come with us." The foot soldiers followed them readily through the dark, twisty mazes of the old catacombs. Among them was one Jeremiah Paul. Like his brothers in arms, legs, and other missing body parts, he wasn't yet familiar with determining his own route and destination. The Lich King's shackles were gradually slipping from his mind, but it was still easier to follow direction from others. His memory was sluggishly making its way back. Fortunately, his new companions had only good intentions, now that they could choose to forgo violence. "Where are we?" He turned round and round to take in the room. They had emerged into a peaceful alcove, decorated with flaking paint and broken cobblestones, isolated from the shuffling of worn-through boots and the scraping of exposed phalanges. "Home," Connor said, "and a quiet place to make acquaintances." The group gathered around the crumbling remains of a fallen pillar. Its broken segments formed makeshift benches and seats, and they all sat facing one another. "How odd," Jeremiah said, wrinkling his nose. "I should smell decay, but there's nothing." "You get used to not breathing or smelling. There's not enough flowers down here to miss it anyway," Connor said. "Everything feels so strange," Jeremiah murmured. "Be glad you could feel it all," Bronwyn replied without malice. "I'm Bronwyn Polleran. My associate here is Connor Greystone. What do you call yourself?" "Jeremiah Paul." They went around a small circle, speaking their names as free souls in a kind of rechristening, until they came to the last foot soldier. He was not a boy, but not yet a man, now forever stuck in between, just as they were all caught between life and death. The youth picked nervously at a split wound on his forearm, pulling the puckered edges of the skin further apart. Jeremiah looked away. That would take some time getting used to as well. "I am..." The foot soldier looked perplexed. They waited patiently as his cracked lips moved silently. "Go on. It will come back to you," Jeremiah encouraged him. The boy finally responded in a tone that said he hoped he got the answer right. Abel? It might not have been his birth name in his past life. The group would never know. But one name was as good as another. And the important thing was that what you called yourself was your choice. Still, something about his face, or his voice, or his quirked smile reminded Jeremiah of someone he had served with in life. Someone, but who exactly it was eluded him. The best his useless brain could come up with was the image of a wooden toy boat. "Welcome, Abel," Connor said. "Welcome, all of you. If there's anything you need, anything you want to know, we are your guides. We find that new arrivals settle in better when they share how they came to be here," Bronwyn said. It was important to help the recently raised accept their new fate and cope with the traumatic memories that sometimes rush back into their reawakened minds. Jeremiah stared at the back of his hand, marveling at how familiar and yet unfamiliar it was. The skin was ashen, mottled with darker purple spots where his unmoving blood had settled. "We died," he said. "Obviously," Bronwyn replied with gentle jest. "But what led to your death and subsequent rising?" Jeremiah had been drafted, pressed into the army without any say in the matter. It was the same with most of the others, but He was surprised to hear that Abel's story was different. I enlisted. Abel continued, pulling at the open wound on his arm, stretching the skin like taffy. Jeremiah glimpsed the white of his ulna and winced. Why did you volunteer? Jeremiah asked. Abel's glowing eyes twinkled. To be a hero, like Captain Whitney. Whitney. If Jeremiah had any breath, he would have drawn it in sharply. Instead, he dug his fingers into his legs and leaned forward intently. Something had sparked in his cauliflower brain. Hearing that name again after... How long had it been? A dark recollection bubbled up that had nothing to do with the Lich King. Something uglier. Something with a choking sound. Abel sat upright and clasped his hands, more animated than he had been since passing through the northern gate. Captain Whitney, the fearless flyer. My father told me stories of his great victory over a formidable orc battalion. Whitney's forces had been fighting the orcs for weeks. They were low on food and even lower on morale. The wise, courageous captain knew they needed to do something bold, something unexpected, if they hoped to gain an advantage over their tireless foes. That was when Whitney spotted the catapult, and a brilliant idea came to him. What if they could attack from above? The captain rushed to the catapult, calling his troops to arm themselves. As his wary soldiers rallied around him, Whitney spoke. War demands much from us, often too much. The fight pushes us to our limits, and if it doesn't break us, it pushes us beyond them, further than we ever imagined possible. Each one of you has done everything that I asked without question, reprieve, or complaint. And so tonight, I ask for one final show of your faith, loyalty, and steely determination. Follow me into this last battle, and by the time the sun crests this field, the day will be won, with our enemy fled or fallen at our feet. His soldiers protested that the orcs would spot them first and attack, but their captain reassured them. Look for my sign and go forward to victory. Those orcs will not see it coming. Get ready, brave soldiers. When life calls on us to act, we must rise to the occasion. Whitney winked and climbed into the bucket of the catapult fearlessly. He drew his sword, and in one smooth motion he cut the rope. His men watched, dumbfounded, as the machine launched their intrepid leader into the black sky, and he disappeared from view. The captain flew silently towards the orc camps, the only sound the air whistling past his ears. Whitney angled his descent towards the largest tent, which belonged to the lead orc bruiser himself. When he reached it, he plunged his sword into the fabric, tearing it asunder as he slid toward the ground. He seized a nearby torch and set the tent aflame. The captain was swift, running from tent to tent with his torch. When his soldiers saw the glow of the fire, they recognized his sign and rushed towards the orc camp, their own weapons raised. The disorganized orcs scrambled to meet the surprise assault, but they were spooked and unprepared. Whitney leveled 3 orcs with a single sweep of his sword, and his soldiers rejoiced when they saw him alive. With their supplies and resolve destroyed, the orc forces were routed. Before sunrise, they had retreated, leaving behind the smoldering remains of their camp. Captain Whitney's soldiers cheered for him. Fearless flyer, fearless flyer. As Abel finished relating the tale, he found his audience speechless, glassy eyes wide. He misunderstood their silence and shrugged. Sorry, I got excited. It's my favorite story. My father's letters told it better. Jeremiah was stunned by what he had just heard. He knew the story was wrong, twisted. Memory pricked his thoughts again. The choking noise. Before Jeremiah could speak up, Connor cut in. Not at all. Stories guide our lives and shape our destinies. That's why it's important to know which stories are true and which are fiction, Jeremiah said. Oh, this one's true, Bronwyn said. What makes you so sure? Jeremiah asked with a lift of his good eyebrow. Because I've heard Captain Whitney tell it himself. He is one of us. He's here? Abel jumped to his feet. I'd like to thank him for inspiring me to follow in his footsteps. Thank him? Sounds like he's the reason you died, Jeremiah muttered. But Abel, either did not hear him or graciously chose to ignore the comment. "You'll likely find Whitney at the pub," Connor said. "He usually draws a good crowd late in the day." "We can drink in our condition?" Abel asked. "We may not experience the same pleasure from a mug of ale that we did in life, but some habits from life never die," Connor said. "I'll join you, if you don't mind," Jeremiah said. "I'd like a word with him as well." They found Captain Whitney in the trade quarter, in a makeshift pub, just as run down as its sparse occupants, with rotting wooden beams, sticky floors, and a sickly light that rendered everyone as dim shadows. Perhaps the Forsaken who lingered here preferred it that way. As it masked their own worsening condition, Jeremiah's eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. And in a way he had. The larger-than-life, or larger-than-death man known as the Fearless Flyer was in an advanced state of decay himself. The flesh on the right side of his face had been stripped away, revealing stark bone traversed by the occasional maggot. Dark earth and purple rot clung to his shabby old clothes. But Jeremiah noted thinning patches of white hair on his scalp, evidence that Whitney had led a long life. The table before him was littered with empty mugs. Without understanding how, Jeremiah knew that Whitney was never far from a mug, and the more he emptied, the meaner he got. "Captain Whitney?" Abel asked, awestruck. "Stories about your heroic victories move my heart to follow your example." Whitney turned his head slowly, neck joints grinding. When he fixed his eyes on Abel, they blazed yellow. His every gesture was heavy and deliberate. "Is that so?" His voice was hollow, crooked. "Draw up a chair, buy me a drink, and share your story, newcomer." Whitney sized up Jeremiah next. His eyes showed a flash of recognition, and then they narrowed to bright slits. The message was clear. "You are not welcome." Jeremiah hesitated for a brief moment, before he took a chair at the table across from Abel and Whitney anyway. Abel signaled for service, and the Forsaken woman carried over a tray with 3 mugs. She was comely, in a good enough condition to nearly pass for living, and her threadbare patchwork dress was only just starting to become musty. Jeremiah saw that the cups she brought were empty. Captain Whitney raised his grandly and made a show of toasting Abel before miming taking a deep draught. "Sir, I joined the Alliance forces because of you," Abel said. Captain Whitney nodded slowly, as if he had heard this sort of thing many times before. "Were you a good soldier, lad?" "Not near as good as you. If I had been, I wouldn't be here." Abel pressed his sinewy hand against his still heart. "I was hardly anything, just a foot soldier." "Do not mistake death for failure," Whitney said. "Everything and everyone dies. Only the strongest souls can be awakened from its firm grasp." "Thank you," Abel whispered. "And thank you for emboldening me to fight for my home. It's what a captain's meant to do." "What stories have you heard about me?" Whitney asked Abel. Much to Jeremiah's despair, Abel related the Fearless Flyer story to Whitney, just as he had before. Only this time, the captain constantly interrupted to embellish it with more details. No. We fought those orcs for months. They only lasted that long because they had steady reinforcements. I had half their camp ablaze before they knew what hit them, and then my men came in to clean up, and I killed at least 5 orcs with one blow." Jeremiah burned inside. The tall tale of Captain Whitney, who'd been his former commander, he realized, was awaking dormant memories. More pieces clicked into place, and with each grandiose feat Whitney claimed, Jeremiah's mind cried, "You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong." Captain Whitney's voice grew stronger and louder as he and Abel went on with the story. More patrons drifted over, settled into the seats around him. A captivated audience, though perhaps some of them felt more like captives as Jeremiah did. He recognized several old comrades, who also seemed to find the captain's exaggerated claims hard to swallow. But none spoke up. "The Orc Bruiser. Most people forget about him. Our jewel is a story unto itself," Whitney said. Abel was so far onto the edge of his seat, he was in danger of falling. You actually fought him? Oh yes, I beat him single-handedly, though he was 3 times my size. I caught that coward running away from the battle and leaving his troops behind. So I gave him what all deserters get, the sharp end of a sword. That's what finally sent the orcs packing. When they saw the leader fall, they scattered. In fact, I hunted them down. Every last one of them. Whitney tipped his empty mug back into his gaping, largely toothless mouth, drinking down lies. I like you, soldier, Whitney said, wiping his dry lips. I could have used more like you in my division. He gave Jeremiah a cutting look. Jeremiah yearned to set the record straight. He wanted to tell everyone about the brave soldiers who had died that night because of the captain's folly, because of his outrageous claims and broken promises and unspeakable cruelty. But the crowd here had also drunk the lies. What little grumbling he heard from the soldiers gathered around was quickly silenced by the captain's cutting glare. So, that's still how it is, Jeremiah thought. Indeed, it seems some habits from life never die. Whitney had led his men by making them fear him more than the enemy. His temper was abysmal on a good day, and it only grew worse the more heavily he poured his brews. His troops fought hungry, only because he withheld rations according to their performance, while his belly was always full. If anyone dared speak out of line, they were punished even more severely. And when Jeremiah's friend had spoken out against the captain's cruelty, he knew something painful had followed, but his mind would only think of that little wooden boat. Abel and Jeremiah were the only souls left in the pub after the captain departed, trailed by his quiescent admirers. I wish we could do something to honor Captain Whitney, to show him how much we respect him, Abel said wishfully. You bought him a drink, Jeremiah muttered. But he accomplished such great things in life. The whole Undercity should celebrate him. I can't bear this anymore. You have to know the truth about your so-called hero. Jeremiah glanced around and lowered his voice, hating himself for being nervous to speak out even now. Whitney wasn't fearless. He was cruel and foolish. He snapped his mouth shut. Could he really speak the truth aloud? He would never forget the days he'd spent locked in a dark box, no larger than a coffin, its punishment for his insubordination. It was a reminder that Captain Whitney decided who lived and died, on or off the battlefield. He heard the choking again, in Whitney's slurred voice. Quiet now, Captain's orders. Jeremiah clenched his jaws. He had already lost everything because of the captain, but he wouldn't allow fear to continue to rule him. In truth, Jeremiah said, the captain was stone drunk the night of the raid, as he was every night. It was dark, and he angrily stumbled into the catapult, got all tangled up in the ropes, and when he stupidly cut himself free, the catapult flung him into the orcs' camp. His tone grew harsher as he released pent-up rage. He smashed into a tent, and it collapsed, then caught fire by accident. The orcs interpreted it as an attack, so they retaliated. Most of us were brutally killed, but... Jeremiah shook his head. We managed to make it into the camp, while half the orcs tried to douse the fire. It took easily 10 men to take down the orc bruiser. When it was done, his remaining forces ran away. We found Whitney in their camp. He'd been hiding like a coward while we fought for our lives, for his life. Jeremiah's eyes flared bright with righteous fury. But truth doesn't win wars, especially when it's ugly and inconvenient. A war hero helps recruit more soldiers, and thus the fearless flyer was born. His stories are everything to me. The tale of the fearless flyer was the last letter my father sent me. Why should I believe you instead of him? Abel shut his eyes tightly, grinding what was left of his broken teeth. Because I have no reputation to protect, and nothing to gain by deceiving you. You're jealous of Captain Whitney. Not jealous, angry, and sad. Jeremiah sighed. He understood that Abel didn't want to believe him, because if the captain's legendary attack had been nothing more than an embarrassment, then Abel would have built his life on a false idol and ultimately lost it. Those stories of valor would putrefy in the dead boy's still heart, along with cherished memories of his father. Jeremiah lifted his empty mug and pretended to take a sip. It was as empty as he felt. He dropped the mug heavily to the table. "Was your father Roland Meadows?" Jeremiah asked. "You knew him?" Abel's eyes were wide with shock. "We were in the same division. He was my friend. You look just like him, you know." He often spoke about his boy. Whitney forced us to sing his praises in any letters back home. "If you're right, why hasn't anyone exposed him?" Abel demanded. Who would listen to a lowly foot soldier over a decorated captain? If we had promoted Whitney's version of things, our careers would have been over. Everyone had their own reasons for keeping silent. My family depended on my wages, so I went along with it. I never saw my family again before I died. But the saddest thing about it, Jeremiah's shoulders dropped. Your father did have the courage to speak up. He confronted Whitney, saying he'd put an end to the lies. He was going to chase down the career, stopping the letters and the falsehoods. Whitney would have none of that, and he cut Roland's throat. Whitney smiled as my friend choked and slipped away. "You're the one lying. My father was happy to serve with Captain Whitney. His letter said so. He's probably still out there." He talked about a toy boat his son built, Jeremiah whispered. Abel fell into a troubled silence. His lower lip trembled. "We were going to raise them when he got home," the pair said quietly, processing. Grief did not discriminate between the living and the unliving. "I don't know what to think anymore. I had little at home, but I had a hero to look up to. I thought my father admired Captain Whitney. He never came home, but I never knew why." "Abel, you joined the army because of your father. You were following in his footsteps, not Whitney's. Your father died for the truth. But it doesn't have to be in vain." Abel put a hand to his cheek, as though expecting tears. He blinked a few times. "I believe you, Jeremiah. So what do we do about the captain?" "What can we do?" I hoped you would say that. I often wished I hadn't supported his lies when I was alive, but it seems I have a second chance to make it right. And you've given me an idea on how to do that. What will we need? Mainly a celebration and a catapult. It didn't take much flattery to coax Captain Whitney to address his fellow Forsaken on the anniversary of his legendary victory. Abel was the key. As the Fearless Flyer's newest and biggest fan, Whitney had no reason to be suspicious of Abel's humble request, and no one questioned that it was the anniversary of the battle against the orcs. It was not. Captain Whitney did, however, balk at the sight of a large catapult, the powerful war machine that had launched him into history. Jeremiah had meticulously recreated every detail on the repaired catapult he'd found in the ruins of Lordaeron. "This doesn't look safe," Captain Whitney hissed, as Abel led him up from the familiar darkness towards broad daylight and the catapult's loading basket. "It's stable enough, purely ceremonial," Abel assured him, startled at how readily Whitney believed him. He had never liked lying for any reason. Ironically, a lesson his father had instilled in him from a young age. But now, he had no father to admit his lie to, and he would forever grieve that. Jeremiah began chanting, "Fearless, fearless." The crowd soon took up the cry with their quavering voices, surging in intensity, echoing through the crooked city streets. Whitney climbed up into the basket and stood tall, soaking in the praise. If he noticed that some of his former soldiers were present in the crowd, it caused them no concern. They had an understanding, a reality Whitney had created, a greater truth held together by the bonds of war. Or so he thought. The crowd hushed, and Abel prompted Captain Whitney to begin his tale. "War demands much from us, often too much. The fight pushes us to our limits." Abel handed up a mug to Captain Whitney. What's this? Whitney asked. I thought we would reenact the moment, exactly as it happens, so all can see your triumph firsthand, Abel said. You were drinking that night, before the battle. Oh yes, Captain Whitney said. The crowd shifted uneasily, fabric rustling and bones clacking in chorus. Hold a moment. Where did you... Whitney looked around. All eyes were on him. I just recalled. A soldier kindly offered me some ale, but I told her sternly that courage comes from within, not from a glass, and I dashed the mug to the ground. He demonstrated, and the empty mug shattered on the worn cobblestones. Whitney smiled. Now, where was I? The fight pushes us to our limits, someone called out. Right, the fight pushes us to our limits. And if it doesn't break us, it pushes us beyond them. And on he went, following the same script he always had. They will not see it coming. Get ready, he said. Look for my sign. At that, Jeremiah and his fellow soldiers tossed ropes over and around Captain Whitney. What is the meaning of this? The captain cried out. He flailed about, but only managed to wrap himself up more and more in the ropes, effectively trussing himself. The way I heard it recently, Abel said, your temper got the better of you. You stumbled drunkenly into the catapult. Got yourself caught on the ropes. Who have you been talking to, boy? Whitney squinted. Who's been speaking out of turn? His eyes fell on Jeremiah and the other soldiers. You. Well, here you are, Captain, tangled up in your own lies at last, Jeremiah said. Release me. Oh, we'll release you, Jeremiah grinned toothlessly. Once everyone hears the real story. Many of us tried before. This boy's father tried before. Now the truth will come from you or from me. Your choice. Don't listen to him, Whitney shrieked. He is lying. The mark of a good leader is knowing when they're beat, Jeremiah said. Of course, you aren't a good leader, so I shouldn't expect you to admit your lies. Give him a chance to do the right thing for once, Abel said. Jeremiah nodded, and everyone looked at Captain Whitney expectantly. If they had still breathed, they would have held their breath in anticipation. You aren't going to believe a newcomer over me? Who's more trustworthy, a failed soldier boy and a coward, or a heroic captain? The many former soldiers in the audience roared in outrage. Look, Jeremiah pointed to the wisps of white hair on the captain's peeling scalp. Whitney died an old man, not in battle like so many of the men who followed him. Why should he fight when he could order us to do it for him? His great victory, the one we are remembering today, wasn't some brilliant plan of his. It was a drunken accident that cost our side as much as the orcs. More, if you count the steep price of carrying Whitney's secrets. The captain dangled helplessly in his rope cocoon. No one cares what really happened. It's ancient history. No matter what story you tell, it ends the same. We're all dead. Death offers a fresh perspective on life, Jeremiah said. All we have here are our memories, and the choices that brought us here. What we believe makes us who we are, for better or for worse. I stand by my story, Whitney grumbled, kicking his legs feebly. Jeremiah turned back to his comrades. Abel, it seems the captain is having a hard time remembering the rest of the story. We were just getting to my favorite part of it. Abel sadly pulled the captain's sword from its sheath at his side. Wait, Whitney said. Don't do this. That's an order. You'll be all right, you used to tell us, Jeremiah said. Captain's orders. We may have pulled through, but never were we all right. Another lie. The last one we all heard as you send us to our deaths. Jeremiah stood over the abusive captain, his shadow harsh like a coffin lid. When life calls on us to act, we must rise to the occasion. Abel brought the sword down in one sure stroke. The blade sliced through the ropes handily, including the one holding the prime trigger of the catapult. Jeremiah caught Whitney's surprised expression, just as the arm of the catapult snapped forwards, hurling him up and up and up out of the ruins, far from the city that would stomach his lies no longer. His frightened screams faded into the distance. Abel gazed solemnly after him for a while, in the direction where the captain, the hero of his favorite stories, had disappeared, likely forever. He wouldn't survive the landing this time, if all his parts even fell in the same place. But all the stories need an ending, as do those who tell them. Roland would be proud of you today, Jeremiah said. Abel lifted his chin and smiled for the first time since his arrival. You know, I think I'm content with being just a foot soldier, like you and my father, feet firmly on the ground, kept to the honest path.